Living in the Past is a Turtle, Mysteries of Azeroth, and Everlook Broadcasting production. This is Living in the Past, your Everlook Broadcasting Company weekly show about all things Turtle, Mysteries of Azeroth. Today is Friday, October 13th, 2023, and I'm Dan, your host for the next hour. Don't worry everyone, Zappo's fine. He's all good. He's tied up in one of the back studios, and there's 17 rabid, heavily armed, and very hungry gnomes keeping a very close eye on him. I'll let him loose once we're all done for the afternoon. As this is the first episode of Living in the Past, I'd like to take some time to introduce myself, have you as a listener understand a bit of where I come from, and share my background and experience, and talk about specifically my experiences with Warcraft. The first thing I'm going to highlight is my history with a guy named Rob, and we did a podcast / live stream / YouTube / Twitch for a very long time called Rob and Dan. We started in about 2007. We started with a single podcast. It grew to a small network. And then we shifted, like I said, from YouTube to Twitch. And then eventually worked up towards Twitch partner, actually. I was a Twitch partner with Rob there for about 5 years until I stepped away from it. I had a bit of a career shift a couple years ago. And I decided I needed to set that aside and let him do that. That career shift that I was mentioning was part of my career that has been more in management and the behind-the-scenes work for broadcasting and content creation. My first position in that was with an esports group where I live here in Boston for PUBG. That was a couple years ago. I was the director of esports. I set up a couple studios, and I generally ran operations for the broadcasting arm of the company. I also have worked as talent management and content creator management for a couple years now, starting with a group called Tyrus, and then changed its name to X, not the current Twitter X nonsense. And then I just actually finished a job with a group called Elusive, where I was the director of talent services. So a little bit of a mixed background in the history of actually background of management, of broadcast management. I have been in the foreground though. I actually had about 4-year stint at a terrestrial radio station out in my home state of Iowa, where I was on air. I was reading news, weather, sports, you name it. I probably did it. I was doing programming and production, both of which are vital jobs to keep a radio station on air. And some of the time, I was also an engineer. You really needed to wear many hats, especially when you only had a select few staff. Most of my job was operations, so at the radio board, punching the dials, things like that. But that was a very interesting part of my career. And then finally, the thing that has led up to all of this, and the thing that many of you will probably recognize me from, is I'm going to say, let's see, it's 2023 now. So we're going back about 18 years to 2005. I was the Ancient of Lore on WoW Radio. I did the Ancient of Lore for about a year there. And then because I was getting really upset about a couple things that Blizzard had done at the time, had to step away from that show. I actually did a show before Ancient of Lore called Town Hall. And that was with myself and a guy named Eldritch, who ended up stepping away from the station. And we had to cancel the show. But that was my summer of 2005 there. And then we ended up having a third show called The Weekend Report. And I did that with Terpster. Some of you may remember Terpster. He's kind of fallen out of the public light after a couple things happened. But I did do a show with him in 2007. But in short, many of you will remember me as Leto, not Dan. Again, I did the Ancient of Lore for just over a year, just almost a year and a half there. I believe my last episode before I handed it off was very, very early 2000. No, it was 2006. It was 2006. Very late 2006. So almost a year and a half. That's my background and where many of you are going to remember me from. Now, as to my history with Warcraft, I have obviously been playing it for a while. Many of us have. I don't think there's a person here on Turtle that hasn't been playing a Warcraft game in some way for at least a decade. Many of us have very long memories and long histories with the franchise. My very first PC game, not the very first video game I played, but the very first PC game I ever played was the original Warcraft RTS in 1994, the year it came out. Warcraft 2 was a game that I played obsessively as a kid for a long time, and it kind of cemented my love of RTS and city builders. But it was really my introduction to the concept of RTS, of strategy. That and SimCity 2000 and a few other titles. I did play Dune 2000. I played Emperor Battle for Dune. There were many other great RTSs back in the day. Also Command & Conquer. I have to mention at least Command & Conquer. Tiberian Sun is still something I love to this day. But point being, my history with the Warcraft franchise goes back to when I was a child. I was very young when I started really trying to play these games and enjoy them. And it was a lot. But it was like a lot. You know? I never really had a preferred faction. I wanted to experience the story from, at the time at least, both sides. Warcraft 1 and 2 only had orcs and humans. It was Warcraft 3 that we saw much more of that story building out with more factions, and Warcraft 3 was also a massive obsession of mine. I loved it. And you will semi-regularly still catch me complaining about how much we lost from the translation between Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft. That's something we're going to get into here eventually, but that's kind of my initial background. Now, I made some choices when I heard when I figured out that okay, this MMO, this big RPG game for Warcraft is coming out. What am I going to do? So like many of the folks who just were scrambling for information, I dug up all the initial alphas, the friends and family alphas that were being put out. So I got to see a lot of like the map and some of the audio tracks starting to be built. It was incredible getting to see that stuff. I initially thought, okay, no, I'm gonna make a paladin. I love paladins, and then I saw the actual like first beta release I was involved in. That was the summer of 2004, and I was so disappointed by where paladins were. Again, story for another time. That's a rant that I need to save for when I have a few hours. Anywho, tried a paladin. Made a paladin. Got him to level, I'm going to say 12 or 13 at the very most. And then I'm like, this does not feel right. I do not like this. This feels wrong. I don't like where this is going. So I rolled a warrior. And I loved it. I was a warrior from the very start. I tried out a few classes, shaman. I believe I tried a rogue at one point, and I did not like rogue at all. I really kind of stuck with warrior. So my first warrior rolled late November of 2004 after the game had released was Makan. over on Laughing Skull. I have stories about Laughing Skull, by the way. Somebody asked me sometime about Pals for Life and Leroy Jenkins because they were Alliance side on Laughing Skull, a PvP server. There is nonsense there to unearth. I digress. From the beginning, I was a warrior. Played that orc for a while. Then, when the WoW Radio crew was like, okay, no, these new RP PvP servers are coming out. Let's try them. I'm like, okay. And that's when I re-roll Makan as a Tauren. Still a warrior, but as a Tauren instead. And I've kind of played Tauren ever since. For the most part. I don't actually play Tauren on Turtle, but for the longest time, I have played either Tauren or an orc, and rarely a blood elf. And that's kind of my limitations of the different races I play. But warrior is like really in my heart. Also, for some reason, Makan's always been an alchemist, herbalist alchemist. I can't not be an herbalist alchemist on Makan, no matter what kind of iteration he's in. I did have other characters though. I did play in TBC a druid. Later stages, I played a death knight and a mage. If any of you are fans of my videos, I've mentioned a couple times that I have played fire mage before. And currently on Turtle, and this is kind of where I'm at currently, Shadow Priest and a Goblin Fury Warrior. For some reason, I've still stuck with Warrior. Warrior has been my thing for ages. This whole new Shadow Priest thing, though, over the last year or so, has been interesting, to say the least. I've learned a lot. I thought I have not like a photographic memory for World of Warcraft in general, but I have a darn good one, especially for vanilla. I have a darn good memory. And I'm still I'm learning some new things and having to relearn parts of the game as a Shadow Priest because the gameplay style is so different from Fury Warrior. It's a lot. It can be a lot. It's a lot to take into. Again, many of us have played this game for such a long time. It goes to show that each of us as individuals brings so many unique experiences to the table, so many different perspectives. Some of the discussions I've had on Turtle, more than any other server, retail, live, classic, other private server otherwise, have been both productive and meaningful. And it's always kind of surprised me, almost, that, I'm having legitimate, deep theory crafting discussions with people that are here from all over the globe because we want that very, not necessarily difficult, but meaningful and deep experience when it comes to Vanilla Plus. It's a lot. So that's just a little information on me. I wanted to take the first part of today's broadcast to, again, introduce myself, get you guys used to how I present information, how I discuss things. Because of how long I've been doing this, going back to 2005, I have a very specific style. And this is going to continue to sound a little different from what you normally hear on this station. However, this is also opening up the window of what is possible here at Everlook Broadcasting and for Turtle. And I talk about this a little bit later here in the episode, but I'm so excited for the potential for this station and what we're doing here. I do later on in the broadcast want to take time to thank some of those people, and I'm going to. But for now, we do need to go ahead and take our first break of the afternoon. Just like the show itself, the music during our breaks is also living in the past. Our first song today is a personal favorite due to how often people assume all us warriors really like tanking. and one of the last releases that Thoriana and Jambo Gin ever put out. The musical tracks for this episode have been removed due to YouTube copyright. To listen to the full episodes with music, tune in to Everlook Broadcasting every Friday with the in-game radio widget. A bit of the Turtle Mysteries of Azeroth soundtrack to bring us back into Living in the Past for this slightly spooky Friday the 13th episode. Speaking of spooky, make sure you get out to the northern part of the Eastern Kingdoms when you're in your mid-40s to level through the brand new zone Gilneas. And it is pronounced Gilneas. Thank you. And make sure you get a run of Gilneas City as well, a beautifully crafted new part of the world, as well as intensely spooky. There are mysteries to solve and threats to stop in this once excessively proud nation. In the spirit of Friday the 13th, let's take some time here to highlight some of the haunted corners of the Warcraft universe. Spirits abound across the world where horror has gripped the land or terrors have caused it to be scarred by the dead. Let's dive in. The first one we're going to talk about is one that a lot of people have been looking at lately because of the newest 10-man on here, Karazhan. There is an immense mountain of different pieces of information that we can look at when it comes to what actually happened there. We know for a fact that Medivh was conducting some really weird experiments. Maybe not necessarily on living things, but certainly things that would cause some time distortions, at least. We're not sure exactly what he was doing, all things considered. The Warcraft 1 manual and mission are relatively limited with the kind of information that they provide, per se. So, again, we can't put our thumbs directly on it. But if you review the original Warcraft 1 RTS mission to go into Karazhan, you're going to see a lot of very weird things. A lot of rooms that are set up looks like almost torture chambers with the little bench and the things holding people's arms down. A lot of blood. There's a lot of blood on the floors. You see a lot of very weird creatures, undead, oozes, these things that you don't normally see out in the regular world, things that were considered odd in the initial RTS of, oh gosh, what is this? And as a side note, that mission also was very stressful because you didn't get any reinforcements, you didn't get any extra units, you didn't get to build anything. The units that you have are the ones you have throughout the entire mission. You can rescue some, but for the most part, it's one of those limited unit missions that I always found so stressful. So absolutely stressful in Warcraft 1. Anywho, back on the topic of spooky. Whether it's the actual people that died there or due to, magical circumstances, it's been discussed regularly that Karazhan is built at a locus of magical activity. There are certainly spirits, haunted presences, undead that are forcefully trapped in this one location. And certainly the possibility of torture and experiments certainly lean into that a good bit. Probably the best example, and this is a part of the Karazhan experience that was used to make Karazhan Crypts, is the room known as the Upside Down Sinners. Most of you have probably seen this if you're level 60 on Turtle. It's the room where all the dead bodies are floating up in the water, and they're chained to the bottom of this flooded room. The room is called the Upside Down Sinners. And it is, like, the first time you see it, you probably recoil a little bit. Your natural reaction is probably to freak out, which is totally normal. It is probably one of the more unsettling things that the original vanilla dev team ever experimented with. Of course, Karazhan as a whole never came out in vanilla, nor parts of it did, but the fact that on Turtle here we get to experience all those and so much more is so satisfying. And just the levels of freaky, of frightening that you get to see in not just the Upside Down Sinners, but in so much of Karazhan Crypts and the Karazhan 10-Man, it's chef's kiss, especially for this time of year. I did mention experiments that Medivh might have been doing. And we're not 100% on those, but it does look like he was toying with chronomancy and other possible fell magics, which very naturally lead into this area is scarred. This area is harmed by those magics. We see that everywhere eventually in Outland. But this is probably one of our best examples in the world of Warcraft of places that are not just haunted, but are spreading this unnatural presence around them, both due to the magical influences of the location and the deeds that happened at the location. Another good example of this, and kind of staying in that realm of Karazhan, is Duskwood as a whole. Now, most people don't know this or don't remember this, but Duskwood wasn't always Duskwood. I know that sounds weird. Like, what would it be called? And the truth of the matter is, it was originally part of Elwyn Forest. It was just another section of Elwyn Forest that people really didn't delineate on. It was essentially the same environment. And the town in Duskwood, Darkshire, used to be a town called Grand Hamlet. Grand Hamlet was actually one of the most prosperous settlements in all of Elwyn Forest, in this entire swath of land stretching miles and miles and miles. Again, that sounds a little odd, but there was a lot of shrinkage that happened when Warcraft was translated from Warcraft 3 to World of Warcraft. And a big part of that was the world generally shrank by a magnitude of about 10 or so. People have argued, it's a much greater magnitude than that. I'm loath to agree with that because I don't know how close that math is. I really don't. So it definitely, there was a lot of shrinkage. I don't know how reasonable it is to say, by 1,000 times shrinkage. I'm not sure about that. Not sure about that one. But Duskwood, as it is now, didn't become Duskwood until it was affected by a malign influence called the Riders of Karazhan. There is possible discussion on an artifact that was involved. I don't know if this was the first time something called the Scythe of Elune was mentioned way back in, I think this was Wrath, that more of this lore started coming. It was either Wrath or Kata. But anywho, the Riders of Karazhan are the reason Duskwood became Duskwood. A malign influence, these riders rode out from Karazhan looking for something, looking for an artifact. And they caused this very negative energy to flow out across what is now Duskwood in this part of Elwyn Forest. The dead began rising. Haunted happenings started popping up in the forest. Spiders and wolves grew to an excessively large size. And then you had more vile influences. There is a necromancer there, for those that don't know. There's a lot of haunted happenings that have since popped up. And it's all because the Riders of Karazhan rode out and brought this horrible influence to the world. And then you also have Tirisfal Glade and the Plague Lands. We're going to start at the left, at the westmost part, and kind of like talk our way towards the right. So, on the far left hand of Tirisfal Glade, you have stuff like Agamon Mills, you have Brill, you have all these townships, you have some Scarlet folks, but all of it has been swept by the Scourge. The Scourge left such a massive scar on the world that even places that they have had to retreat from or pull away from are still haunted, are still this corrupt area In Warcraft 3, there was the Blight, where you actually couldn't build buildings for the Scourge unless you spread the Blight there. That I think we see some of that reflected in story and world building for Warcraft in the negative presence that you still get at a lot of places because of the Scourge. Look, for example, not Tirisfal Glade, but the zone south of it. My brain is actually forgetting the name of it right now, and some of you are shouting in world chat the name of it, and I can't remember for the life of me. I cannot. But the zone just south of Tirisfal, even though there are no real Scourge centers or presences there, the zone itself is permanently scarred with this haunted, this almost spooky vibe because of the horrors that happen there, because of the presence of that much undeath. There is also, and Turtle has done a good job of really representing and showing this, an issue even to the west of places like Brill and Agamemnon Mills. And it's this western Tirisfal area that's up in the mountains. Again, Turtle has done an incredible job of showing this area off. But that's where the Highborn, after the Sundering, initially landed on the Eastern Kingdoms. And they tried to set up a civilization there. And it failed because of a massive negative presence. We're not sure exactly what that is. Again, Turtle has done a great job to start to dig into that, and I love it. For conclusive answers, though, we're actually really not sure. One theory that was very popular back in the day, especially when we were doing Ancient of Lore and Lore Keepers regularly, was the idea that there may be some kind of old god that either died there or was imprisoned under that landmass. And instead of trying to build something around it, the Titans were just like, we just need to bury this. Just bury it. Just bury it. That was a very popular theory for a while. Turned out to not be true, and that's fine. But the fact of the matter is that anything in Western Tirisfal Glade is at risk for some kind of corruption that just exists there. A very haunted, a very malign presence that exists. And then in going into Tirisfal Glade proper, obviously, the Forsaken have actually done a pretty good job of, well, not necessarily unspookifying the area, of making it less haunted, certainly have cleaned things up from the Scourge presence. They want a more peaceful place to live. So while the area isn't like fully not haunted, it's definitely more cleaned up where you get around the capital city ruins. But then you have the Plague Lands. And all bets are off. Even areas that aren't directly under Scourge control have spirits everywhere. Ghosts, the undead, crawling, just trying to do something with their existence. Most of them are mindless undead. Some of them are angry, are hateful. Around the Scourge cauldrons, you have undead that just spring out of the ground. Most of you will remember the cauldrons and how a little difficult they can be to deal with at times. If you're trying to level through the area and you're trying to get that big XP, you're going to want to try to clear the cauldrons, but at the same time, my goodness, that stuff hurts. And as you continue to go through the Plague Lands, not only is the presence of undeath magnified the closer you get to Stratholme, but you start seeing the land corrupted to the point of having these giant mushrooms and fungus sprout out of it. The very air of death itself hangs heavily in these regions. The zone I was thinking about, by the way, was Silver Pine. I don't know why I couldn't remember that. I'm not sure why. But it's not just the Eastern Kingdoms that are filled with spooky and death and everything. The Eastern Kingdoms, due to the Scourge, do have a massive presence of haunted or in general disrupted spaces. I generally like to describe a place that's haunted as having been scarred or harmed by actions that have been taken by living or non-living things. So in this case, the entire Scourge invasion caused an immense increase in haunted or spooky happenings in the Eastern Kingdoms. But there are things on Kalimdor that we need to at least highlight. One of the ones that people will remember from the Scarlet Monastery quest for the Horde are the Ashenvale Barrow Dens. They are filled with undead assassins, or stalkers, I think, and undead druids. I'm not sure exactly what the story behind everyone there being dead is. I can't remember it off the top of my head, and whenever I talk about lore, I normally will do at least some effort to research what I'm talking about beforehand. So I'm not 100% on why, but it is full of ghosts of different druids. And speaking of staying in that same part of Kalimdor, we have Darkshore. Now, you're probably telling yourself, there really isn't any haunted or spooky or ghostly happenings in Darkshore. It's just a little dark. However, there is one thing, and I love bringing this up because it's one of my favorite things to talk about, is the slain corpse of the old god servant with a Titan-built weapon shoved into its carapace. Many of you will have seen this walking by or doing one of the two quests there around the southern part of Darkshore, but the fact that this corpse of some kind of old god creature is not only still visible, but has been excavated and is still in one piece. All this time later, the time between the ordering of Azeroth, if we're going back to when this fight might have occurred, and now, this weapon is not only still sticking out of its head, but the corpse is still mostly intact. This is a relic from when Blizzard really respected the old gods and did their best to show how absolutely doomed we are if an old god was ever to escape its containment. And when they start to escape their containment, we start to see multiple body parts. The eye of Cthulhu, the mouth of Cthulhu. These are not things that we can contest with. So I like to put the old god servant in Darkshore in something that's very kind of spooky. Something that is much more legitimately haunted that I don't know if people don't remember it or anything, but it doesn't usually come up in these lists, is Witch Hill in Dustwallow Marsh. For those of you that haven't done the quests at Witch Hill, you have to go around and get some different weird items for the human that's there. You have to do a little bit of looking around. In later expansions, it ended up being a more directly haunted experience. Oh no, there's a malefic presence. My friend's acting weird. Oh no, we have to kill this giant demon. And it gets really excessive, but at least here in vanilla, it's subtle. It's a little off-putting. And you have to ask yourself, why am I going out and doing these things for this person? So Witch Hill is definitely up there. And going back to the northern part of Kalimdor real quick, I do also want to mention Felwood and the Legion corruption that's there to this day. It's not traditionally haunted. I will say it is unsettling and a little spooky, And all of the toxic fallout, all of the stuff that's raining down the waterfalls from Mount Hyjal, from the battle for Nordrassil, for Azeroth in general, really, but I don't want to bring that up. But Felwood is definitely up there in unsettling zones. Not necessarily haunted, it's more demons roaming the area and satyrs and whatnot. But it definitely is a little spooky. While the world of the weird and spooky, or in some cases straight up broken, often involves a struggle or inconvenience to the player, sometimes serendipity can arrive in the most unexpected ways. During one of the last phases of Vanilla's beta, back in late 2004, and again in early 2005, the boats from Menethil all suddenly started dropping people in the ocean, and players couldn't travel between continents. To help relieve this issue, while the developers bug crunched the sudden problem, they needed a way for characters to cross the ocean. The solution came in the form of a simple man standing on the docks that was kind enough to ferry us to safety. This is the original song, written and recorded by Eladane of Greystar on April 25th, 2005. Listeners, please take your hats off and raise your beverage to the lament of Captain Placeholder. The musical tracks for this episode have been removed due to YouTube copyright. To listen to the full episodes with music, tune in to Everlook Broadcasting every Friday with the in-game radio widget. The Lament of Captain Placeholder was one of the most requested songs during my Downtime Down Under segments back at WoW Radio, and it was one of the first tracks I ever played on the station. It'll always have a very unique place with me. The hard work that went into our productions back then is not dissimilar to the efforts that the radio staff here has put in to get this broadcast system up and running. An important set of thank yous to those that really deserve some recognition here at Everlook Broadcasting. Bolton, Charles, Vorag, Dapper Titu, and designer Dave for their audio work they've contributed to the many segments that you've been hearing on this station. For the infrastructure and systems we use to keep the station on air, we have Bowser and Torda to thank. Writing has been courtesy of not just the people recording many of these lines, but also the Turtle Narrative team. Sound design and segment editing has been the hard work of Volka and the Turtle Soundtrack team. Lastly, for myself, I run the broadcast software and automated systems and curate live broadcasts for the station. There are certainly folks that I've missed in this. The team for the radio station is massive, and everyone has contributed in an important and meaningful way. I'm so excited for the future prospects of what we can accomplish here at Everlook Broadcasting. In addition to catching myself here every Friday afternoon Eastern Time, we'll continue to include market watches and community calendars. It's been incredible seeing everyone's reactions to both those features and the hard work Vorag has put into them this week, and I'm hoping we can do more features like them in the future. I'm also hoping that as we continue to develop our content here and what we'd like to do as broadcasters, I can include more unique features on Living in the Past. Interviews, early feature discussion, and even developer commentary are all things I'd like to open up as we continue to grow this production here at Everlook. Every Friday afternoon, I want to bring you everything that I can when it comes to what's going on here on Turtle, giving you a real opportunity to be informed and to have an honest discussion. With all that being said, thank you for taking the time to join me today, our first broadcast. Our nostalgia continues, even though today's one is at an end. And I hope you enjoyed the show here today. A huge thank you to the Turtle developers, moderators, staff, and volunteers. Without the entire team's hard work and dedication, we wouldn't have this station or the server group. An additional thank you to the audio engineers and creators here for the use of their soundtracks they've created, which we use for segment transitions and intro audio. If you'd like to find out more about what I do, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/TheDanNation and my series Ancient Lore. a recapture of the spirit of my original podcast, The Ancient of Lore. Alright, it's time to let Zappo out, as long as the gnomes haven't started chewing on him yet. However, until next Friday, let's all keep living in the past.